Hello, and welcome to my short talk about First Chapter Friday in the middle school classroom. My name is Buffy Hamilton, and I am an 8th grade language arts teacher in North Georgia. I have been teaching for 29 years, and I'm excited to share with you today how I have been integrating First Chapter Friday into my classroom. Last year, I did it sporadically, and I would do it for virtual learning as well as face-to-face learning. But this year, I have dedicated every Friday of instructional time to First Chapter Friday. So let's get a little bit into what it is and why you might want to do it. First of all, I was inspired by fellow language arts teacher Abby Gross. You might know her blog, Right On with Miss G, and she's also very active on Instagram. And I would encourage you to follow her in both spaces, especially her Instagram posts as well as her Instagram stories, because she's more active in her Instagram space, whereas she's blogging once a month. But both resources can provide you a treasure trove of resources on how she is integrating First Chapter Friday into the classroom. There are other great language arts teachers doing similar types of activities and variations on First Chapter Friday. I just find that Abby's teaching style meshes with mine, so she's been a great role model and mentor for many of us, not just me, in inspiring us to infuse these read-alouds into our classroom, to help our students just get broader exposure to a variety of books, to get books on their wish list for reading, and to give them the experience of hearing a read aloud. We tend to think it's just for elementary school, but read alouds are for middle and high school students as well. So I do want to encourage you to check out her resources on Teachers Pay Teachers. Again, there are other great, fabulous resources in that same space. I just find that Abby's graphic organizers tend to work great for me, and I love that within the package that you purchase that you have many options to use, whether you're using print. There are also digital versions of the graphic organizers available, and these have been my go-to. So, how I do First Chapter Friday, again, I block off every Friday for that instructional experience, and I have created a module in my Canvas LMS or Learning Management System. So the students know that when it's Friday, we go to that module to see what the current read and or activity and resources include. So I'm going to show you a actual sample of one of those pages and within that module in a moment. But these are some of the design elements that I like to include. I usually have a preview of the book of some sort. I like to use Google Books, but you could also use a preview that might be available from the author's website, perhaps even a slide with the book cover and a teaser. I like to also use that as a preview as well. A recording of the read aloud, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, and then any other relevant links to that book. And obviously for some books there might be more resources than others, but you might include links to the author's official webpage or a page that they might have with their publisher. If you find high quality book trailers, I say include those too. You'll also see that a lot of authors are on YouTube and they're chatting about their books and talking about those books, so you can include that as a supplemental resource as well. One other thing that I sometimes do with First Chapter Friday is sometimes I'll set up the reading experience with a writing warm-up. So I'll give them some thought-provoking questions to consider and write about in our discussion board in our Canvas LMS, just to activate prior knowledge and thinking and to kind of give them a little hint of what the book might be about. You might also consider having an in-class bulletin board to support any special First Chapter Fridays. So I recently purchased, I think it was a dozen books that all were related to September 11th. And we had a special edition First Chapter Friday. And so I actually printed out my slides. I had a virtual book tasting set up that students could look at, and I'll show you what that looks like in a moment as well. But I also printed the slides from the virtual book tasting so that the students could preview them and see which books they might want to read. Our focal point for the actual read aloud was Ground Zero by Alan Gratz, but I felt that providing choices for books commemorating a special occasion, and again you could do it with a theme as well, just was an extra layer of support and encouragement and excitement for the students. So what I'd like to do now is to show you a sample page as well as a virtual book tasting that you might create if you're doing a more elaborate first chapter Friday with multiple books. And again, you really only have time to choose one for the read aloud, but once they finish listening to the read aloud and doing their listening template, which I'll show you momentarily, then they can look at that virtual book tasting and decide if there might be some other books related to the mentor text that you featured that day that they might want to read. So let's take a look at some of those items in detail together. So here is a sample of a first chapter Friday page that we did just a couple of weeks ago. And our featured book was Hour of the Bees. So I actually had a teaser slide for them to look at. And then for this particular lesson, I actually had for them an embedded copy of the book that I was able to use from the publisher. And so they could go through, and if they wanted to follow along, they could. I don't do that for every reading, but when I find a copyright-friendly version that I can use, that I do include that, simply because some of my students, particularly those who might be a little bit below grade level with their Lexile, find this useful to have the text to follow along as they listen. And then, of course, I have the recording that I have created for them, and that way, if they're absent, they can participate from home. Attendance has been a big issue this year. I'm sure many of you can relate to that. But if they happen to be out that Friday, or if they just want to hear the read aloud again, then they can go and listen to that. And then you might have additional links that you have available for them to preview. Now, for our special edition first chapter Friday that we did in memory and honor of September 11th, I did definitely a little bit more elaborate work. You saw the bulletin board. We had the featured read aloud, Ground Zero, which every student wanted to read afterwards. And I usually have at least 2 copies of the book. Sometimes they're my own personal copy, or I may go ahead and have them put on hold through the Media Center for students to go and get if they would like. For this one, I actually purchased each of these books. Our Media Center had some of them. Some of these titles they did not have, but I wanted to have at least 1 copy of each one. And so once we finish the featured read aloud for Ground Zero, then they could go through and sample the other books, and they could see if there might be other books that they wanted to preview. And if they felt like they didn't have enough time, that following week we actually had a choice board day for them to catch up, make up, and enrichment. And so I actually also incorporated this as a choice board catch up enrichment day activity. And if they wanted to spend class time further investigating this virtual book tasting of the September 11th books featured as part of our special first chapter Friday edition, then they could do that. And for my virtual book tasting, I always have a copy of the book cover and then a short blurb, which I usually just grab from Amazon, and then a link to the Google book. And then the virtual gallery template that is also from Abby Gross, Right On with Miss G. I love all of her choice board and virtual gallery walk and station learning templates. And so they're very easy to manipulate and customize and make your own. But this might be something you could do. You could even do a mini book tasting, maybe of other books by that writer if you had time. So if you were featuring, Lori Halls Anderson, and you wanted to pick a book to read by her, but then feature some of her other books for students to investigate once you finish the read aloud and the listening template, then you could certainly do that. So our usual procedure for First Chapter Friday is to provide them the listening template. I usually have some type of warm-up activity. Again, it could be a writing prompt, or I could just project an image of the book cover and ask them to make a prediction about what they think the book might be about based on the title and the cover art. And then we usually jump right into the read aloud portion pretty quickly. I do want to encourage you to record those, again, so that your virtual students or students who might be absent can still participate or catch up and make up the read aloud First Chapter Friday listening template activity. But as they are listening, they have one of the listening templates that I use from Abby Gross. And again, I'll show you one of those in just a minute. I provide tubs of coloring pencils, and we just review the different reflection elements of the listening template that they need to include in that work. So with that said, with your read alouds, a couple of things I have learned through experience. One, you don't have to start with the first chapter. Feel free, if the first chapter is kind of dull, but then it gets really exciting in chapter 2, you can start with that. Use guest readings that are already available on YouTube. So, for example, K.A. Holt recorded herself reading aloud every chapter of House Arrest during the pandemic, and she is a marvelous reader. If the author or someone who is an excellent reader has already recorded a copyright friendly or approved read aloud on YouTube, use it. Especially if you are trying to do this with multiple sections through the day and you're wearing a face mask and it's a bit exhausting at times to try and project your voice for a read aloud and keep your mask on, you could do that. You could even record your reading ahead of time. Post it in your LMS. I like to use Screencast-O-Matic, and then I load it in a part of Canvas called Studio, so that I'm not putting my recordings out on the World Wide Web, but they are housed internally in the LMS. And you could use that again as a makeup kind of video for students who are absent, or if you find yourself becoming tired of reading multiple times through the day, you could do a couple of read alouds live and then have your pre-recorded session that you could play and pause and talk through the read aloud. 10 minutes is an ideal reading time, at least for 8th graders. That's just enough to get them into the book, but not overwhelm them. Those are some things that I've learned this year. I do have a scoring rubric, and so typically we have 3 read alouds a month, and then toward the end of the month or at the beginning of the next, we choose our best work. So I tell them, you keep all your listening templates, and then when it's time to do your choice activity, you choose, what were your best First Chapter Friday read alouds from September in this case. We had 3 for the month of September, and then they go through and they complete the scoring rubric. And I apologize, I just realized our rubric was cut off for you, but here is the rubric I developed on my own. So I evaluate them on including a relevant sketch or image, questions and wonderings, predictions, thoughts, notes about conflict or theme, connections, just any general notes they are making in the boxes, their rating of the book if they think they want to read it, completion of all the thinking tasks and boxes in the graphic organizer, use of color to enhance thinking on the page, and then overall effort and attention to detail. And then I do ask students to write why this is their best work, and then they also do their own self-assessment before they turn in the rubric with the work. And it's interesting to see sometimes where these points fall, because many times they're actually harder on themselves than I am. But I think it's a good metacognitive activity for them to reflect on their own work before the teacher looks at it. And I do count this as a summative or a test assessment grade. But again, they're in control, and I tell them that. You're in control. If you do all of your listening templates really well, then you've got at least 3 choices for that month to pick from. If you're struggling a bit or didn't make up something, then you're limiting yourself. So it's to your advantage to make sure that you do your best work for each First Chapter Friday, and if you're out, to make sure that you make up that activity. Real quickly, I just want to show you a couple of samples so you can see a variety of some of the listening templates. Again, these are all from Abby Gross, and if you purchase them, you get lots of choices, and I like to mix it up each week and give them something different. Some of the templates you can customize and change the book title. Not all of the templates are available in digital format, but the majority of them are. Again, I'm not here to sell you something, but I have found this to be my favorite product because my 8th graders need a little bit of structure to help them listen and be an active listener, but yet still leave room for creativity, but not throw them off the deep end and just give them some type of blank piece of paper. Here is a completed scoring rubric, and so you can see, where they're evaluating themselves. Again, here she didn't give herself credit for something she did when in fact she did do it. So that's just kind of a quick overview of how I do First Chapter Friday. I hope this information from the trenches of the classroom has been helpful for you. You are always welcome to contact me through my blog if you have questions. But again, I defer to Abby Gross because she really is such a thought leader with this learning structure. But I know it's always helpful to see what other practitioners are doing out in the real world. Thank you for your time, and happy First Chapter Friday.